All right, so, we talk a lot about trade and tariffs on this show,
Mm,
and you sent over some articles that really kind of flipped the script on how we view these things, especially tariffs.
right.
And, uh, usually we think about tariffs being bad for consumers, bad for trade, but these articles present a very different perspective.
Yeah, they really do.
So I wanted to kind of dive into this a little bit with you today.
Okay, sounds good.
And, the first thing that really struck me, I mean, one of the articles actually opened with this quote from former President Trump, who said, quote, "To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariffs."
Wow.
Right. Not exactly the first word that comes to mind, at least for me.
Well, you don't hear that every day. I mean, it's certainly a different perspective than what we're used to hearing.
Absolutely. And the articles we're looking at today, they actually kind of embrace that perspective. They argue that tariffs, maybe they're not the enemy we often make them out to be.
Yeah, the core argument is that they can actually be used strategically as a tool to strengthen American manufacturing, bring jobs back to the U.S.
So not just about, slapping taxes on imports and calling it a day.
No, it's more nuanced than that. It's about, they talk about using tariffs as a lever, right, to incentivize companies to bring production back to the U.S.
Okay, so walk me through that, how that work exactly.
Well, the idea is that by imposing tariffs on goods imported from, say, a country where labor costs are lower, you make those goods more expensive for consumers here in the US, right?
Right.
And in theory, that makes American made goods more competitive, but also, and this is key, it creates a financial incentive for those foreign companies to avoid those tariffs
By
altogether.
moving their operations to the U.S.
Exactly. One of the articles even cited a study by the Peterson Institute for International Economics.
Okay.
And they found that after the U.S. put tariffs on washing machines back in 2018, foreign direct investment in the U.S. appliance sector actually increased, which suggests that maybe some companies were choosing to just build factories here to get around those tariffs.
Okay, so potentially a win-win then. American jobs, boosting the domestic market.
That's the argument, yeah.
Yeah.
And they actually point to the auto industry as a really good example of this.
Right, because we've seen companies like Toyota and Volkswagen building plants here in the U.S.
Exactly. And the articles argue that, the threat of tariffs on imported cars, it was a big factor in those decisions. Now, of course, companies decide where to build factories based on a lot of different factors,
Yep.
but these articles definitely suggest that the potential to avoid tariffs was a pretty strong motivator in these
So
cases.
it's like this ripple effect, right? If more companies start doing that, could we actually see a resurgence in U.S. manufacturing?
Yeah, and maybe even more competition, potentially leading to innovation and helping keep prices down for consumers in the long run.
Okay, so it's starting to sound like maybe tariffs aren't just about, this tit-for-tat trade war scenario.
Right. They frame it more as a bargaining chip. Like,
Yeah.
look, the US is a huge consumer market, right? That's leverage.
Right.
And tariffs, they're suggesting that it's one way to use that leverage to push for fairer trade deals on the global stage.
Okay, so address some of the things they say are putting American businesses at a disadvantage, like foreign subsidies and things like that.
Exactly. Create a more level playing field.
So they even use this term, I think, with smart tariffs, right?
Yes, smart tariffs.
Yeah.
Not just, across the board tariffs, but very targeted, strategically implemented tariffs, again, to correct those imbalances and create fairer competition.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, this smart tariffs approach, it works, right? Could that actually put pressure on other countries to rethink their own trade practices?
It's possible, right? Could we be looking at a more balanced global trade system down the line?
Right.
It's a big question. The articles make a pretty compelling case, I have to admit.
Sure.
But we also have to acknowledge there are downsides, there are risks. This is not a simple issue.
Absolutely not. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this whole conversation. Like, we could spend hours unpacking all the different angles here.
Oh, for sure.
And I think, for our listeners, it's really about, okay, if this smart tariff strategy takes hold, which industries benefit the most? Are there any that might actually be hurt by this? And then, of course, the big question, what happens to consumers? What does this mean for prices in the long term?
Lots to think about.
Lots to think about. So I think that's a good place to leave it for today. But, this is definitely a conversation that we're going to continue having, I'm sure, as things develop.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners, keep an eye out. We'll be following this closely. And until next time,
Thanks for having me.
thanks for joining me.